Hello and welcome to Artifacts, a living archive dedicated to preserving the first-person stories of queer, avant-garde, and underground culture, told by those who lived it. Today's episode is part of our series Silver Factory, an enthralling journey through Andy Warhol's factory, whose inhabitants included an array of characters from socialites to superstars and speed freaks. In this episode, we hear from Taylor Mead, often called the first underground movie star. Raised in the wealthy Detroit suburb of Grosse Pointe, Mead quickly grew restless and set out across America, hitchhiking the country half a dozen times before finding his voice as a poet in San Francisco's North Beach. Discovered by filmmaker Ron Rice, Mead starred in The Flower Thief, a touchstone of the new American cinema, and one of the first films to feature an openly queer character. Soon after, Mead joined Andy Warhol's circle in New York, where his playful wit and irreverent spirit made him a fixture in the Silver Factory. He starred in some of Warhol's earliest films, including Tarzan and Jane Regained, Sort of, before returning from Europe to appear in Lonesome Cowboys, Nude Restaurant, and Wynn Chamberlain's Brand X. Beyond Warhol, Mead never stopped performing, reading poetry, acting in experimental plays, and later appearing in Jim Jarmusch's Coffee and Cigarettes. This film weaves together 3 interviews recorded in 1998, 2000, and 2002, as well as priceless home movies which tell the rich and chaotic story of the life of an underground icon.
Why don't I start out with your childhood? First of all, when were you born?
That I don't want to say.
Okay.
Somewhere in the 20s.
Okay.
I want to be vague as possible.
All right.
Because people email me everything on my internet program. I just won't say. Sometimes I say I'm 37 or vice versa, or 12. I was 90 when I was 4, I think, and now I'm down to about 12. Because I was a proper little boy, with perfect clothes. I was too well bred. My parents divorced. Officially it was after I was 2 years old, but my mother, I believe, wanted me aborted because my father was looking elsewhere when she was pregnant with me. But in those days, he just didn't. It was too dangerous. I'm not done. But then we moved to Columbus, Ohio, when I was about 3 or 4. I went to this wonderful kindergarten. It was, it was sort of like this. It was very, very relaxed. And I think at the age of 4, I was doing all kinds of multiplication and sums and everything. I was pretty precocious. And the great thing about the school was, if you accomplished something or did something very good, they rewarded you by letting you wash the windows of the French doors leading out onto a fire escape. And I remember standing on a chair washing the windows and looking down at the kids inside who all envied me. And this was a great idea for the work ethic, reward people by letting them work. And of course I lost that ethic later on. I think boarding school in Connecticut, with all its forced memorization and completely formal type of education, that destroyed all the work ethic I had. I didn't really know my father until I was 8 or 9. Mm-hmm. When we moved back to Detroit, he divorced his second wife. But he was quite extremely well read and quite brilliant, and he was a great politician actually, and he was chairman of the Democratic Party in Michigan for 20 years. Especially Detroit. But eventually he got in trouble with all his shenanigans and favoritism things when I was 12 or 13. And then I was staying with my father for a year or 2, which is all we could stand of each other. And he thought I'd maybe not want to go to school because of the scandal on the front pages of him and the county commissioner. But I could hardly wait to get to school. I loved publicity, and the fact that we were worthy of such scandal, I thought would put me on an upper level. Because at that time I was going to school in Grosse Pointe, and everyone else had a much bigger house than we did. There were great mansions, and they were part of the country club. My mother had to live amongst the high society, even though my father wouldn't give her any money. He had plenty of money, but he simply did not give her sufficient. But she liked to work anyway, so she worked and went to parties every night because she was extremely popular, an enormously talented pianist also. She was talented and she looked like sort of a cross between Irene Dunn and Mary Astor and Garbo, and just a very handsome woman, you know, beautiful. So she was sort of one of the darlings of Grosse Pointe. And as a result, I hardly ever saw her. I was brought up by black maids. I used to sit up till late at night waiting for her to come back from a damn party, you know. But then she'd tell me all about the great houses, and so I grew up. I feel that I grew up in the middle of the tracks, you know, because you know I was in society and yet outside of it, especially by the fact that I wasn't a member of the country club, so I had to get people to sign for my drinks and stuff. But I would blurt things out that were just so gauche. But as a result, I was extremely popular. I went to all the parties, all the kids' parties, and parties before dancing school and stuff. And I'd just be quite wild, but then I'd go home and think about what I'd said, and then realize that I'd made such gaucheries as freeze hell over.
Really exciting new product. Well, get right in here, people, no matter where you are. Silence, living rooms, kitchens, bar rooms. You take a good knife, a clean knife, of course. Excuse me. And you dip the knife into this concoction, and then you bring it up. You don't have to bring it up that far. You bring it up a medium distance from the jar so nothing spills. And then you take a slice of bread, any bread, diet bread, real bread, white bread, plastic, any kind of, no, don't plastic, plastic.
Were you always sort of seen as a class clown?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And I was elected president of my class, but I was conducted in such a humorous fashion that the teacher said, "Taylor, you can't. You're conducting meetings in too much hilarity."
Mr. President, what do you intend to do when the inevitable happens?
When the inevitable happens? Well, I'm very optimistic. I don't think the inevitable will ever happen.
So she dethroned me. And then I'd have secretaries, I'd have girls sitting on my lap while I conducted class meetings. Which I'd seen from movies, I think, you know, or something. The boss and the secretary. And of course I'd be girls. I should have had boys. You know. I was always a star of the plays from the 5th grade on. The biggest sensation, I think I did a few things at Gabriel Richard, but then in the 7th grade at Grosse Pointe High School, the public school, I played an African king and did a crazy dance on stage and was the star of that and had a tremendous ovation from about 500 to 1,000 students, whatever. I felt very insecure in my social position. So I think that's why I was kind of outrageous at parties, trying to cover up my shyness or my feeling of low self-esteem socially. Even though my mother, of course, was just practically the queen of Grosse Pointe society, but still, the fact that we weren't members of the country club was a major embarrassment for me. Because I had fantasies of being a king, or I had all these grandiose fantasies. Simple, infamous faggot Taylor Mead, I want to take all my psychiatry out on you in an ever-maddening circle. I want to swallow your cold. I want to stand on the corner of 14th and your imagination. I want to die of a heart attack. But I was already very erotically aware by the time I was 4 or 5.
Really?
I was always in love with the slightly older boys next door. But it hadn't manifested. It manifested itself in that I wanted them to tie me up and hang me in a sack in their barn or wrestle. And in fact, before I was awakened sexually, the kids at school used to always chase. They'd get out of their cars, and we all had licenses when we were 11 or 12 years old in Grosse Pointe. And they'd chase me down the street and pull down my pants. And there was, an underground eroticism there, which blossomed when I was about 12, with the handsomest boy in school, actually. He put his hand. We were at a film. I forget what the film was completely, and he put his hand in my lap, and I immediately knew the score. Really? I immediately knew what it was all about.
Really?
Yeah. And then I sort of took over. I said we went out to a field across from the Punch and Judy Theater. Wonderful little film house in Grosse Pointe. And there was a full moon, and I said, let's wrestle, and no holds above the bills. And then I got on my bicycle to ride home, and I had an orgasm, and that was the first totally conscious orgasm. And I think I had to get up and walk my bike home about 10 blocks. But I didn't know how far you could go till I was about 19. I was hitchhiking in the South, and someone took me home and really assaulted me or raped me. And because his mother was in the next room, we were in this big bed which squeaked every time we moved. So I was afraid to move. I said, his mother will hear us. He got on top of me, and then he started blowing me. And I said, oh my God, what is happening?
Because I used to blowjob?
Yeah, I used to kiss this football player's cock and things like that, but we never thought of penetrating each other. And then this guy, and then I thought the next day, since he was still alive and well, I thought, my God, what you can get away with. And I think my father sensed that I was gay also. In fact, one of his political friends had told him that, he said, I think your son Taylor's gay. When I was arrested in New York, he wrote the judge this cop-out, phony, middle-class bullshit letter saying, I don't see how my son could ever be involved in this kind of thing. He's so well brought up, such corn.
Exactly.
But he knew how to talk to judges anyway, because I did get off twice. And spending a few days in the tombs downtown, I used to carry a razor blade so I could slit my wrist if I were put in it again. And I came very close to doing just that the second time. When I went into the Times Square subway toilet with one of the movie's Tarzans, and he showed me his Big Peter, and I showed him my small one because it was cold, and I didn't want to get excited unless I was sure something great was about to happen. And it didn't. Well, I was entrapped.
You were entrapped.
Once was in the Washington Square John, and I'm in there peeing, and the big guy comes in and stands next to me, and I just looked over out of curiosity, and he had a very small car. I was completely uninterested. and he said, you got a place to go? And I said, oh no, I don't. He said, yes you do. And another big cop came in, and they put me in the janitor's room, and the big guy, and they just said, you're this, you're that, and I just said, yeah. I knew if I said no, that I'd get a real crack. So the sons of bitches hauled me in, and then a stupid letter from my father and all that, but it got me out. And the second time, a cop at Bryant Park behind the library, he got in a conversation with me. He's very handsome, and I put my hand on his knee or something like that, just like that, nowhere near his. And he said, "You're under arrest." And he said, and I jumped over the wall and just threw myself over the wall and landed on my side. He landed right on top of me. And then he said, "How much money you got in the bank?" And of course, this is notorious when the Vice Squad, arresting men who weren't with their wives and things like that, and just draining them of their bank accounts. Yeah. Or they used to say as rich as a New York detective or as wily as a Philadelphia lawyer. Or a Detroit lawyer. I suddenly got on a bus then in Detroit and took off with $50 in my pocket. But at that time, it was the 40s. And then I sent a telegram to my aunt, and she said she kept her awake all night when she read. I said I'd gone. And then I started hitchhiking the South. And it was one of the happiest times of my life. It was just, I had no luggage, nothing, just the $50. And the $50 was then worth probably $500 or a couple $100. And then I'd stay at various funny hotels and things and wander the streets of southern towns until then in Columbia, South Carolina, I went into a girls' dormitory. I saw a beautiful piano in there, and I sat down and started playing the piano. But it was a woman's dormitory, and I'm playing the piano, and the matron sort of comes over and says, "Well, who are you? What are you waiting for? What are you doing here?" I said, "Well, I'm waiting for this girl." I said, "I want to surprise her." She says, "Whose girl?" I said, "I want to surprise her." And then there's silence, and she goes away, and I got this feeling, oh, she called the police, you know, because she was a bit suspicious. The judge said, "Oh, pursuit of education." I said I was going to study mathematics. Oh, pursuit of education. How much money do you? But this jail was like about the size of this, a little bigger than this room maybe. And the black people had to stay on one side, and the white people on the other, and then in the middle were these cells for the more crazier people. And we all slept on this cement floor, and I thought, this is so absurd, the black people there and the white people on this side. I saw the whole absurdity of race relations in America. And but then at court, and then we had hominy grits at 5 in the morning, and then hominy grits at 5 in the evening. That was it. But it was a wonderful revelation, and it was total democracy. And we all had one common cause to get out, and it was like we had one common oppressor. That was those people in power. So and it was a wonderful revelation, actually. It was just the total opposite of Grosse Pointe. As far as it was people really on an equal basis, whether they're black or white or anything. It's great. It was just a great feeling. It was nothing like the fucking tombs in New York where you're isolated and you can't see out a window. And this was a whole different thing. And I headed east. I was going to go to Cape Cod. I'd heard about Cape Cod and everything, or I don't know whether it was the beauty or that it was a free-spirited, open place. But I couldn't get around New York, and I was afraid of New York because I used to come down from boarding school to Broadway shows. I was totally overawed by Times Square and everything, and I was quite afraid of New York, and of course the tension of New York. But I couldn't get around New York, so the bus I had to go into New York and then take a bus to Cape Cod. And the bus went up 8th or 9th Avenue. It was a warm, beautiful day, and everyone's out on their stoop. And I saw the way they were minding their own business. I thought, here's a city where I can be anonymous.
About how many years would you say you spent hitchhiking and being on the road?
Oh, I was about 10-year period.
About 10
off
years.
And on, yeah. And I hitchhiked across the country 5 times and up and down another half dozen times, perhaps. Then I was in San Francisco in the mid-50s. But this goddamn police sergeant was arresting people right and left and intimidating everyone in North Beach. And it was right the year when Alan was reading Howl and everything. It was the mid-50s. But the cop intimidated me. He said, "Where do you live?" I said, "Well, I live down in the Mission." He said, "I think you better go down there." And he had a black Mariah. And he scared the wits out of me, but I was fascinated by North Beach. I knew that something was in the air. At the bagel shop where all these people drinking and smoking, and sometimes a jazz group would be playing, and they were wild, and then they were defying everything and saying, "This is shit, and that's that." And so I got up on the bar to read poetry. They said, "Who do you think you are?" So I read one of my wildest poems. I have blown and been blown. I have never had a woman. I have been in great jails and terrible jails. The great jails were the tanks, and the terrible jails were the model prisons. I have seen my mother a few hours before she died. I have seen my father pinching pennies and worshiping the USA of money madness. Fuck it. I've been beaten nearly to death before an enlightened Greenwich Village crowd. I just blasted it out, you know, and most of the poetry then was not all that gay or anything. And I just outshouted them. And then they wound up applauding me, and I was in. I was totally into the scene.
So Ron Rice saw you there.
He saw me there, and he had wanted someone else to make a movie with. Then Ron and I both went to see Pull My Daisy together. And we both said, that's what's happening. The spontaneity of Alan and Jack Kerouac and everybody just wandering around in the camera following them and interesting people. And Ron said, that's the movie we've got to make. We'll make a movie of you wandering around San Francisco, The Flower Thief, which when it showed in New York, all the critics came down and wrote for national magazines and everything. It was a new wave. Yeah. And I spoke to Alan because I did the movie with Alan 2 weeks before he died, and I said, well, you know, it was Pull My Daisy that really inspired us to do The Flower Thief, and we thought, you can make this movie for a few $1,000s, and we made ours for maybe $500 or so. And Alan said, oh, Taylor, that movie, it cost $20,000 or $30,000 to make. Oh yeah, it was all one shot. And I edited it. I left everything in. There were no out. But then Ron wanted to put a blue wash over it. He was, even though we were defying Hollywood and everything, he still was upset that the Hollywood people hadn't recognized it, because it received a great response at the Coffee Gallery in San Francisco. And of course, a lot of the local people were in it. And it was the ending of the beat scene.
And did he give you any direction?
No, we just go to a location and we'd come up with ideas spontaneously, or he'd want me to pass by a window or do something, and then they were in this great old firehouse that was being torn down. We had found crazy kinds of wheels and stuff to interact with, and I found a big teddy bear. And then we got some of our wildest friends who pretended to hang a soldier. and it wound up like Iwo Jima, and we're hanging this soldier. It was a real soldier. He let us put the noose around his neck. And Ron just traveled in a little kiddie cart around, and just made it beautiful. His work was fantastic. He was a genius. Yeah. I mean, it was like someone who really didn't give a shit. It just was in awe of being alive, sort of. Or just, was reacting to what was happening, like in Pull My Daisy in a way. But I was pretty sophisticated, actually. Yeah. Very well read and semi-trained. You know, I knew a lot about Stanislavski and all. How to keep low key for a movie. If you don't give the people good pictures this year, Ron Rice and Taylor Mead will storm the palace with howling, hungry public, one way or another. You are dangerously boring the public this year, you phony stuffed tight dungarees and padded bra no nakedness land. The people may be laughing at Jerry Lewis and crying with Ava, but that is because they haven't anything better to laugh and cry with them. Once, like in the late 50s, when I began reading, because I always used to carry a notebook, and I was a compulsive writer. And I always wrote things which I never changed, aphorisms and stuff like that, and short poems and things. And then people kept seeing me that. So at Larry Poon's coffee house, the Epitome on Bleecker Street, they insisted that I get up and read, because everyone else was reading poetry, and Larry Poon's would have a toilet seat around his neck, and we were being parodists and everything. And they insisted I read, but I couldn't get up. I was too shy to get up, so I read at a table with, not even on the little stage. And I just read, and they started responding tremendously. So then, forget it. I'm off, and then I was reading every other night at the Gaslight or the Fat Black Pussycat or whatever, and But we would, but sometimes I would read my wildest poetry. But I'd read at the Gaslight, and we would read our wild stuff in a way trying to drive out the customers. And defying all the conventional rules and languages and using colloquial language and everything. So that's why Bill Cosby and Woody Allen, that's why the owner, and we sort of resented Bill Cosby and Woody Allen because they were trying to please the audience. And we were trying to insult them and upset them. So we kind of looked down on Bill Cosby and Woody Allen.
And Howell seemed amazing to you.
Absolutely. I thought it was one of the greatest things I'd ever read. And real 20th century masterpiece. And it was New York, too. It made me think deeper, much deeper about New York and about, the people wandering, looking Negro streets at dawn, looking for an angry fix. And it was just stunning imagery. And then I thought, then I put myself into it, since I was always wandering New York and often sleeping in Central Park or wherever I could, and begging and everything else. And so I thought, well, that's me too. It made me highly, much more conscious of myself and everyone else and their problems and the societal bullshit.
Why I am a superstar. Einstein taught me the violin. That's why I can't play it. He was bad at mathematics, but he discovered the universe. Delius discovers it with his music. To the cows to Andy Warhol's cows, to the cows in the fields.
It was Henry Geldzahler that introduced you to Andy Warhol.
Formally. Andy had already, I think, seen the films.
Okay.
And had been at some of my poetry readings, but I never formally knew who he was or was. He looked unusual to many people, but to me, I'd seen so many unusual people that it didn't register. I think he was checking out the downtown scene. He checked out everything, and what was happening in film, and he wanted to be ahead of everybody.
But then his Campbell's Soup thing came out, and Time magazine and everything wrote about this change in the art world and what was happening, and this wise guy who was putting a Campbell's Soup can up there and charging a couple $1,000s for it. And who was this? And it upset the major media like crazy, and everyone knew something was happening. I thought it was a brilliant satirical takeoff on the United States. And I loved it, and it fitted in with the whole beat idea of defying everything. It was one of the most subtle moves possible. So then I'm wandering, like I used to wander even all the way to the George Washington Bridge and back. I've always been a wanderer. This gets me into trouble too. And I'm wandering Central Park in the middle of the afternoon, and Henry Geldzahler, who was curator of modern art at the Metropolitan, I'm right behind the Metropolitan, he bumps into me. He knows me from readings and stuff. He says, you want to go over to Andy Warhol's house? And I said, oh, sure. So we went over to his house, and Andy gave me the royal treatment, which I later found out. We little sandwiches that he had his mother make, and I met his mother, and then we were there. And then a short time later, he wanted to go to California. He had an opening at Irving Blum's gallery on La Cienega in L.A. And we thought it was because he was afraid of airplanes, but Andy later said he just wanted to see United States. And since I could drive and Wynn Chamberlain had a station wagon, he and I could drive, and Gerard and Andy would sit in the back seat. And we trundled across America, and had great experiences. And I didn't know they had a camera with them, because we should have been filming the whole trip. And of course, there's this story of where we were going to so many Maplewood restaurants, middle-class restaurants, where Andy could use his credit card And finally I said, I'm picking the next restaurant. We're no more Naughty Pine restaurants, or I'm leaving the trip. I was at bored with this total middle class safety bill. So I picked out this huge rotunda in the middle of Oklahoma or Kansas or something. This great truck stop, which had a modern thing to it, and but inside was all truck drivers and kids, teenagers. And we walked in, and the whole place was just stunned. And there were maybe 100 people sitting around, a really big place. And then the kids started coming over to our table to find out where we were from. And of course, being from New York, that was still another world to them also, as it always will be. But it was fascinating, but there was a tension in the air. And so, and Andy, I think, was very nervous. But we somehow carried it off and got out and into the car. I never said a word the rest of the trip. We went back to Naughty Pines. And, but then we arrived in L.A. and Dennis Hopper and Peter Fonda gave us this great party the afternoon we arrived, and we had no place to stay, and there was the World Series going on in LA, and all the hotels were booked, but Dennis Hopper was married to Brooke Hayward, and her father was Leland Hayward, a big Broadway producer. And he had a suite at the Beverly Hills Hotel. And I insisted when we went there that, well, we're not staying at a cheap hotel, we're staying at the Beverly Hills. But, and it just turned out that Leland Hayward was in New York and his suite was vacant. So he gave us, so Brooke phoned her father and he gave us his suite at the Beverly Hills Hotel. And we did some filming of Tarzan, of me using the shark-infested Beverly Hills pool as one of my places where I swim or something. But we got so bored with the Beverly Hills Hotel, we moved to a motel on the beach, or on the Santa Monica Beach, within a few days. And then Andy wouldn't call the, then we went to Andy's opening, which was Elvis Presley's, 6 Elvis Presley paintings. And that created a sensation. And then at breakfast in the morning, Andy read the papers, which said this really illustrator from the advertising world has dared to put up these realistic pictures of Elvis, and this is really the end of art, or something like that. And Andy said, "Oh, they hate me, and he loved it, you know. Then Irving gave us the number of the number one hustlers in LA, the number to call to get a great young man to come to your hotel and everything. And Andy and I just said, oh, Andy, or Taylor, you call. Oh, Andy, you call. Oh, Taylor, you call. We chickened out totally. There was a great reception for Duchamp at the Pasadena Art Museum. And a camera person from Time magazine pushed me aside, and I said, "How dare you push Taylor Mead?" I think that's what fascinated Marcel Duchamp. I made it, I just screamed it out. And then later there was a dance, at Pasadena's most ultra hotel, the Green Hotel, and I was wearing Wynn's golf sweater, which came halfway down my legs. Look, and everyone else was in tuxedos. And the only Hollywood stars invited were like Peter Fonda and Dennis Hopper. It was very exclusive for the Grand Dames of Pasadena. But they wouldn't let me in with my insane sweater. And so who comes out to interfere with Marcel Duchamp? And he escorts me in. Not that he escorts me to the center table, and I sat on his right the rest of the evening. And then Patty Oldenburg and I became the stars of the evening. We danced up a storm, and she's a great dancer. And it turned out to be a great deal of fun.
Had there been a plan before you went to California that you would film?
No. And I thought they bought the Bolex in L.A., and it was, they had it with them all the time. But then we had, I guess Andy wanted to have a conception. And I think we drove under this sign that said Tarzana, which is one of the towns around L.A. And I or Andy said, well, let's do a Tarzan movie. And that was it. And then Naomi Levine, who was living with the painter Sam Francis at the time, she heard we were making a movie, and she got on a plane and went out there. And when I heard she was there, I knew she wanted to be in the film. I said, no way can she be in this movie. She's how pushy, you know. Naomi, I can't believe her pushiness. But we said, well, we'll film her one day and look at the rushes and get her out of our hair. We looked at the rushes and she was fantastic. And she was wanting to be nude and everything, even though later she tried to cut some of the nude scenes out, and I had a knockdown, drag-out battle with her in the editing room. And but she was marvelous, and as Jane, and I'm Tarzan, and she's fat and I'm skinny. And then we had John Houseman and Klaus Oldenburg, and Dennis Hopper was my stand-in, and Andy, one of the few movies that Andy was in, and he's trying to direct me, and I take the script and tear it apart, and I refuse to climb a tree to get coconuts, and I give Dennis Hopper some money on camera to go climb the tree and get the coconuts. It's a very funny little scene. But the film was shown 3 or 4 times, got a great review from James Stoller in a movie magazine. And then Andy buried it. And, you know, he used to say, maybe it's better they just talk about our movies. You know, of course, that's a killer for an actor. You know, it's better, they talk about it, that's enough. He had done Sleep with John Jarmusch, Sleeping, and it was supposed to be 8 hours, and it was actually a loop, about a 20, 30-minute loop that he played over and over and pretended it was 8 hours of someone sleeping. Fraud, you know. But we weren't fraud. When we did Tarzan, was a total breakaway from the conceptual stuff. And in fact, Sleep, I think, was the only about his very first movie, and then Tarzan was his second. Yep. And then he started doing the personality movies with crazy people like myself and Mary Warrenov and Bridget. But he mixed those in with the conceptual stuff, 12 Hours of the Empire State Building, and the Foundation they'll show that one week, and people think, well, that's Andy Warhol. It's just one take of a building, a stupid building. And so they wouldn't go to the films that they would have enjoyed, you know, personalities and crazy people. And so we are buried. We're buried alive. Tarzan came out for its 3 or 4 showings, whatever it was. And people wrote about it, and someone wrote the voice and said, we don't want to see any more 2-hour films of Taylor Mead's ass, because my loincloth kept falling down in Tarzan and everything. And I'd be walking up a grand staircase, and my loincloth would fall down, my ass would be showing. So I wrote the voice the next week. I said, I have searched the vast Warhol archives and can find no 2-hour film of Taylor Mead's ass. We are rectifying this undersight with all the vast resources at our command. And we filmed 2 hours. Andy filmed 2 hours of my ass, which is actually, I mean, he wanted me to hold still for 2 hours, which is impossible. I think it wound up being about 75 or 90 minutes or something like that. And I had never seen it, actually, until I saw it in Pittsburgh last November. And it was filmed in 63 or 4, I guess. But it looked quite beautiful. Andy had lit it beautifully. It looked like a George O'Keeffe painting, you know, with these wonderful curves, my beautiful ass. And then I sang Moon River. Moon River, wider than a mile. I'm crossing you in style someday. 2 drifters off to see the world. There's such a lot of world to see. We're after the same rainbow's end, waiting round the bend, my huckleberry friend, Moon River and moi, me. I had to do something. And then after 20 minutes, I said, oh, enough of my ass. But the movies are a revolution.
All of you have got to dig. We are the bank robbers, rapists, sodomists, all the yearning, mad desires of the populace, which the government has to let be seen, or else, wow, an explosion.
Supposedly it was a hangout for crazy people, and Andy was always working on a painting with Gerard. And then Andy would drift into filming, and but if you were around and Andy didn't use you at all, I always felt very awkward if I wasn't being involved in something. So I generally I didn't go hang out at the factory all that much. I would sit by the phone waiting for Andy to call, like an idiot. And I was too shy to really go there. In a way, that probably may have saved my life. But you know, I was in several shootings with Andy, or one. But when Valerie Solanas came, we'd just come back from San Diego Surf, and I had every right to go to the factory to look at trailers, whatever. And I could have walked in that day, but maybe it would have been better, because when the gunman came in 4 years before, I jumped the gunman, and everyone else just sat around like they were watching a movie. And then he humiliated Andy, and however much I was upset with Andy, I thought, well, this little hustler is insulting a great genius, you know. And when he put this woman's rain hat on Andy's head and had him kneeling there on the floor, I became infuriated, and I think I was stoned too, so I didn't give a shit. And so I jumped him, and he was powerful. It was like jumping a brick shithouse, you know. And then he was playing Russian roulette with his fucking gun, and he handed it to Paul, and Paul claims that he wasn't going to give the gun back, but Paul, I think, just sat there like we were all mesmerized by this guy pulling this act, which most thought was phony. And the guy was about to take the gun back, and Paul swears he wasn't going to give him the gun, but I saw it so clearly. It's so clear to me even now. So I jumped the guy, and the guy went for a knife he had, but it was a folding knife. And nobody helped me. They just sat there. And then I took this rain hat. I forgot whether I took it from Andy or he'd put one on my head. And I went to the window and smashed the window dead center. It exploded, and the YMCA was across the street. People poured out of the YMCA. And this gunman was going to take... Then I grabbed the frame and went after the gunman, who was running downstairs. He had someone else waiting outside. They were going to take one of us and put us in the trunk of this stupid car they had downstairs. And but then all hell broke loose, and crowds of people went running out. But I wanted Andy to phone it into the paper, and he didn't. He was in one of his, oh, it was nothing, you know. And of course later, I thought he still didn't believe it was for real or something. Of course, he found out a year later that it was very much for real.
That he might have been, you know, a phone is always good for trying to reach out. Anything, any instrument in the house that you can touch and feel, and that'll give you contact with others, is also a contact with that great big thing up there. And you know, when Jesus in the wilderness, what came to him? A snake! Yes, snake, which might have destroyed the house of God, just like this lectern has nearly perished from fear of a wild beast. But I, who've been thrice over in Austin, Texas, once by an old lady who was very religious.
Artifacts is a free oral histories platform. Please like, subscribe, and visit our website, www.artifacts.movie for an ad-free, interactive experience with bonus content. If you're able, please make a tax-deductible donation at www.artifacts.movie/donate. Hit the link on screen to watch another Artifacts interview.